Thank you very much, Dr. Devi Prasad Shetty, Chairman of the Board, Professor Krishnan, Director, distinguished faculty, alumni, and students of the Indian Institute of Management, Bengaluru. It's really a privilege to deliver the 48th Foundation Day lecture at this esteemed institution. The subject of my lecture is about geopolitics and the growing prominence of the Western world in our international relations. In many ways, in his very brief remarks, Dr. Shetty has actually pointed to the extraordinary transformation that is unfolding in the world today. So my job is really to really lend a political color to it, the international side of the politics that is happening. I also want to tell you the story of how India's relationship with the West was seen as, impossible to really resolve the many contradictions that they were there, that had emerged over the decades. But today, it's become one of the most positive elements of India's international relations and its foreign policy. Less known to the world is really the fact that the Indian Institutes of Management and the Indian Institutes of Technology have been very much this live, lasting bridge between India and the West that was built in a period of warmth and survived one of the most difficult phases of the 1970s and 80s, when India's relationship with the West took a nosedive. And today, it is really at the very heart of transforming global politics, global economy, and rejigging the international system, if you will. So it is also IIM Bangalore's 48th Foundation Day, but in a few weeks, we'll be reaching the 60th anniversary of the establishment of the first two Indian Institutes of Management, the first in Calcutta in November 1961, and the Indian Institute of Ahmedabad in December 1961. So when we talk about the IIMs, it is but impossible to ignore the name of Vikram Sarabhai, who founded the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. But he was much more than that. I think Sarabhai represented the combination of a lot of things. We often have lost sight of those. One is about national development. How do we use atomic energy and space to transform India's national capabilities and put India in the front lines of science and technology? The second aspect of Sarabhai's personality was entrepreneurship, that it was not just government departments doing things, that coming from an industrial family and coming from Gujarat, which is a state that has had a long history of entrepreneurship, that he brought that sense of entrepreneurship, of the capacity of the individual and the private sector to transform India in the decades of development that would follow. And he was also a great institution builder. The Department of Space is entirely his initiative, and he was part of the building of the Department of Space as well. And the Indian Institute of Management, of course, will remain as one of his great contributions among many other institutions. But the greatest thing about Sarabhai, from my perspective at least, is that to be rooted both locally and globally, to be national and international. That Sarabhai, and Bhabha before him, both of them really leveraged their connections in the Western world to get the initial support that we needed to build our national capabilities in two very, very difficult sectors. At a time when people were saying, why do you need atomic energy? Why do you need space programs? You don't have drinking water. You don't have roads. Is this your priority? And the same was said about the IITs and later about the IIMs. But today we've seen that the importance of elite institutions which are deeply rooted in local imperative, but also integrally connected to the global trends. I think it is that linkage between the two that Sarabhai and the IIMs and the IITs represent today, and they're very much at the cutting edge today of the innovation and the transformation of the global economy that is unfolding. So what I want to do in the next half an hour or so is to really say a few words about geopolitics, and then look at the conception of the West, and then review the changes in India's engagement with the Western countries, especially the United States, Britain and Europe. I will then conclude with a brief discussion on what it means for India's role in the world, and especially the kind of role the IIMs and the IITs are going to play in the days ahead. To start with, brief discussion of geopolitics. In its purest form, I mean, geopolitics is really about the role of geography in the conduct of international relations. The notion that geography is permanent and plays a critical role in a nation's relationship with other nations. While governments will come and go, parties will come and go, the political orientation might change, the economic orientation might change, but geography remains a critical, almost a near constant in shaping a country's international relations. But we now know, I mean, geographic features are not permanent. Rivers, of course, change course, mountains erupt, meteors strike once in a while, destroying some of the great civilizations. We also know that climate today is a variable, long taken as a constant and an externality. Today, we are struggling to cope with the larger challenge of Anthropocene, or how human activity is fundamentally changing our environment, and dealing with it has become the greatest challenge for us. And here, all the skills of our technologists, our economists, our management experts will be demanded to resolve this problem, which has emerged as the #1 issue in the world. And when we talk about geopolitics, it's not just about geography. I mean, that there are the physical characteristics of a place, but there are a number of other factors too. When we talk about demographics, the nature of the population and its composition, a lot of discussion about China. China is aging before it gets really rich. We know Japan's population is declining, so is Russia's. So countries which seem powerful and stable can lose a lot if the demography changes. Similarly, the economic power. That historically we've seen countries rise and fall, whose economic capabilities rise and fall. And then we have the technological question that those who are the first movers in technology development, whether Britain's successful use of steam engine, I mean, saw the Industrial Revolution begin in England, and since then we've seen how those who lead in technology also tend to lead the politics and the structures of international politics. So I think in terms of geography, of course, India, we had a conception of our own, which was that of that India was secure in its geography of the mountains in the north, the great Himalayas, the seas in the south, and that we were really quite secure. But that was never true. We had invaders pour through the plains into the plains of Indus, across the northwestern frontier. We had ideas like Buddhism radiate out of India across mountains and seas. India was never an island, but there were moments when India chose to be an island. It turned inward, turned its back on the external world, and acted as if it was an island. And it was those periods when India really fell behind. And today, as India reconnects with the world, as it looks outwards, that the nature of our geopolitics, the nature of our economy, a lot depend on that external orientation today and how we manage that external orientation, because the world is an unforgiving place. Geopolitics is an unforgiving place, and therefore how we manage that is a great challenge. Just to talk about geography, I mean, look at our Chinese friends, what they've done. We used to think Himalayas are a great, barrier, but today they built highways across the mighty Karakoram and into the Arabian Sea, which is what we call the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. They built a railway line across the permafrost of Tibet that is inching into Nepal and will soon be close to the Gangetic Plain. That is the China-Nepal Economic Corridor. Beijing is also connecting Yunnan province in southwest China to Burma and to the Bay of Bengal, which we call the China-Burma Corridor. So all these examples of actually engineers, I mean, I'm sure many of you come through IITs and other engineering colleges, that engineering can change geography because geography is, as we said, look, it's not permanent. We talk so much about China's Belt and Road, but there were other engineering projects in the past which profoundly altered the geography and geopolitics and economics of the world. I think of Suez Canal. The Suez Canal, built in the middle of the 19th century, broke the land barrier between Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea, thereby shortening the route between Europe and India. Of course, all of us learned in our school geography books how that one single act has dramatically altered the shipping routes, the way the world in Europe and Asia interacted with each other. So therefore, that engineering and man-made activity can profoundly alter geopolitics and the nature of relations between countries. Today, there is the question of technology. And today, the Chinese not only talk about a Belt and Road initiative, but they're talking about a digital Silk Road, which means really using the current advances in the digital domain to shape future standards of technology, to dominate the e-commerce markets, to dominate telecommunications, to use space services to gain upper hand in the global economy. And we've seen that pursued relentlessly by China in the last few years. While the West doesn't talk about in these terms, in the Chinese Communist Party is pretty good at propaganda, so they can frame these and the system can really drum it out. But we've seen in the West, I mean, we've seen what Elon Musk has done, Dr. Shetty talked about to EVs. But even more interestingly, it's a great story. There's a new book called Liftoff. It's about how Elon Musk broke the NASA's complete dependence, and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration's complete dependence on the government organizations to do launch of rockets. Rocket launch business was once a sole monopoly of the government. But here is someone who was not part of it, comes out, sets up his company, SpaceX, and breaks the monopoly. Already companies like Boeing were already working, and Lockheed were working with the NASA, but they were working on a cost-plus contract. So they had no incentive to innovate. And here SpaceX comes and begins to challenge this domination of the monopolies that existed in rocket launch. And today, it is SpaceX that has become the main launcher for NASA. And we're going to see Amazon stepped in. They're starting with tourism, which is probably more for propaganda purposes. But I think we're going to see the dramatic transformation of the space sector by the innovations that are unfolding, and which also means there is going to be an enormous amount of competition in space. For example, on the moon, what we talked about, geo means Earth, and the politics on the Earth are also going to shape the way countries are going to work in the moon. The treaty that was drafted, for example, in the 1960s, called the Outer Space Treaty, which was a soaring internationalist, look, it belongs to everyone, let's all work together. That let's not do anything nasty out there, nasty stuff out there. But today, China and the US are in a race to the moon. And the first person who gets there is going to set up bases, who's going to set up some manufacturing, or use the moon to go further into deep space. So this is just one aspect. When Dr. Shetty talked about on the health sector, talked about the digital sector, that talks about a whole range of other activities that are unfolding. Space is just another example, and that it is this competition that's going to shape so much of our politics in the days ahead. That brings me to the second part of my presentation, which I wanted to briefly talk about what is the West. Why are we talking about the West today? Why is it such a big deal that India has a good relationship with the West? On the face of it, I mean, you would think that it is only natural that we have good relationship with the West. But it was not always true. In fact, we've had huge problems with the West starting from the 70s and the 80s. But today, much has changed. And I think partly my lecture is about explaining that change. But before we go there, I mean, we need to understand what is the West. I mean, all of us know instinctively. I'm sure most of you are heading west. to various places when you finish your degrees and are going to run all kinds of companies out there. But the fact is, East and West, in purely geographic terms, are relative, especially on a spherical object like the Earth. So when we talk about the West, we're really talking about a deeply political concept, which is really, it's easy to think in the old days, we used to think of the West as Caucasian, probably as Christian. But today, there's profound change in the ethnic composition of the United States, where the Caucasians are already close to becoming a minority. Role of religion and Christianity has significantly declined, and the role of non-Christian religions in the US has dramatically grown. There are also non-Caucasians and non-Christians in the ruling establishments of the West today, whether US, UK, Canada, Australia. Look at the US, the vice president, first generation, second generation Indian out there. UK, the Chancellor of Exchequer is an Indian. In Canada, the cabinet has a large number of Indian seats sitting in it. And you have a whole lot of other places. Ireland used to have an Indian origin prime minister. And we're seeing across the board the dramatic expansion of the Indian diaspora in all these countries. And many of them today are powerful positions within that part of the world. Here, I mean, I think, and let me say here, a growing number of these people who, shall we say, are part of the ruling classes in these countries, I believe, have gone through the IIMs and the IITs of India, and today run many of their powerful institutions in the Western world. So the West is not just a geographic concept. As we said, look, it's about democracy. It is about political liberalism. Those ideas, I think, will remain powerful and appealing, and that's what makes the West. Now, the West is today organizes itself into a number of forums, like the Group of Seven, which brings the world's leading industrial democracies. We have the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. We have the so-called Five Eyes, the intelligence sharing agreement between the old English-speaking world, UK, US, Canada, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. And together, these institutions today exercise great influence on the world. So what is the nature of India's relationship with this West, and how has it changed? As I said, living in Bangalore, for you, that there should be good relationship, that there are good relationship today between the US and the West, would seem so self-evident. After all, today, Bangalore is at the center of global technology hubs, many of them with deep connections to the West. I'm also told that the largest concentration of US passport holders in India is in Bangalore. So you have actually maybe close to 70,000 US passport holders who live and work in Bangalore. That this is all taken for granted, but this was not the story 20 years ago. That when I was growing up in the 20th century, the opposite was true, that it was actually assumed India and the West will not have a good relationship. It was in fact, absolutely taken for granted that the West is hostile to India. And within the West, the belief was that India anti-Americanism was part of India's DNA, and that the two sides were never going to meet. If you go down that argument, that story, that narrative, you'll find something more complicated. Well, the Indian political class and the political elite certainly became anti-Western, anti-American, starting from the late 60s through the 70s. But our people, I mean, our middle classes were deeply tied to the US, because many of them went to the US, UK, exactly the number of countries, all English-speaking world, where the Indian diaspora, Indian middle class went to study, to work, and became very much part of those societies. So while the governments were fighting with each other, at the people's level, there was this profound positive interaction between India and the Western world. And today, that linkage today has become a huge advantage for India and for India's relationship with the rest of the world. As I said earlier, that the migration and movement of Indians into these societies has produced a large number of them professionals, certainly in the US, where the graduates from IIT, IIM, and a whole lot of other universities in India today run, as we said, all the top technology companies. And today they shape much of the digital innovation, the revolution that Dr. Shetty was talking about a little earlier. So how does this, is this simply a non-governmental bridge that exists, or does it have any longer-term political significance? I believe the recent development of the Quad, the so-called Quadrilateral Forum that brings US, India, Australia, and Japan, largely to construct a security order in the Indo-Pacific, is going to be increasingly about technology. We've already seen the Quad has taken an initiative on the vaccines, that India will produce the vaccines supported by the US and Japan and distributed by Australia across Southeast Asia. So that's just the beginning. And we saw the Quad set up working groups on space, on 5G, and a whole lot of emerging technologies. They even issued a statement in the summit that took place in September in Washington, where they said that the Quad must work to develop ethical principles that must govern the use of new technologies. All of us are familiar with the debate on artificial intelligence and the kind of problems that it might generate. And some of you might recall going back to 74, when biotechnology was beginning to gain ground. Some scientists in US, California got together and developed what was called the Asilomar principles, that they would use self-restraint to be careful in how you deal with biotechnology research. And those principles have largely held. And today there is a big movement, across the world. And certainly in the Western world, in the Quad today is symbolizing that we need to work out a broad set of principles of how the new technologies that Dr. Shetty talked about, that are used for benefit of humanity, and that they're not used to construct a surveillance state of the kind that is happening in China, or to create a lot of the ills that exist even in the West. The question of how AI systems, how naturally they become racist in the US, maybe casteist in India. So I think the need for us to work together to prevent many of the negative aspects of human society from being automatically transmitted into the new technologies. So why is the Quad important from a political perspective? Is that in the past, India was unwilling to work with the US or the Western countries bilaterally, yes, but we were very reluctant to work with them in small groups. And I think that's what the Quad has changed in a decisive manner, and that today India is not defensive. India is not, in self-doubt to work with the US, and I think that is the big change that has taken place with the Quad, and we're just seeing the beginning. How quickly the Quad has moved today. Just 3 years ago, it was not even clear that they'll meet at the ministerial level, but now we had 2 summits in this year alone, and that the Quad is likely to become the principal forum to deal with many of the areas you're going to be engaged in. As I said, technology, the management of the future pandemics, and the ability to deal with the revolutionary transformations that are being forced by the digital revolution on the rest of the world. Of course, the Quad, when we talk about the West is not limited to the US. We also have the other countries which are as I said, look, Canada, UK, England, UK, Europe, and Australia and others. And Australia, Japan, we are dealing in the Quad. But UK and Europe, again, we've not had good relationships with them in the past. But today, once our relationship with the US has improved, today we are getting closer to dealing much more intensively on a whole range of issues with US, with UK and Europe. UK, as you know, has huge advantages in cyber capabilities. Is one of the top AI institutions, the so-called DeepMind, which Google bought over, is in London. London is a major center for cyber and AI research. You have Europe today, which sets the regulatory standards for much of the new technological changes that are taking place. So for India, which is going to be a technological power, driven by most of you, your predecessors who went through the portals of IIMs and IITs, and many of you in the future, that this enterprise of transforming, of managing the new transformations that are unfolding in the world is going to be a very, very important challenge ahead of us. But we must remember that there is a danger always that as we do more relationship with the US, there is always the fear that somehow we will become, dependent. We lose our freedom of action. So that sense of diffidence, sometimes the fear, often dressed up in anti-colonial or anti-imperial kind of a thing, is often there. But my sense is that today in India is a very different India today. And you could imagine a weak India 50 years ago, 60 years ago. But today India is strong enough to be able to deal with the world on its own steam. And that's that India today is the third largest economy in PPP terms, but in nominal terms, it is already fifth or sixth. We are crossed France in total GDP at $3 trillion. We are almost level with Britain. It's a matter of time India will overtake Germany, and then there is only Japan, China, and the US ahead of us. India is also the third largest spender on defense after US and China. And the kind of technological capabilities that we have today, which still can be transformed into something even bigger. Therefore, for India, there is no reason to be defensive today. And that we can feel confident with our new generation, which is capable of dealing with the West on our own terms and not on the terms set by them. And that is the future. And within this, the relationship between India and the US and the Quad is going to play a major role. But I'll just give you a couple of examples of the period of defensiveness in which I grew up in a place called Jawaharlal Nehru University. I mean, you might have heard all kinds of things about it. At least IIT Delhi was next door to us, so we used to have quite an engagement with them. But here is the story. I'll tell you about JNU, what happened in the 70s. When JNU was trying to set up a school of computer sciences, you talk about the mid-70s. Of course, US was no, so we're not going to get anything from the US. So we had a bright spark who said, look, why don't we get computers from Bulgaria? Maybe socialist Bulgaria was given the responsibility under the Soviet system of division of labor that they were the guys who were going to do computers. So it tells you something that it is easy once you get trapped in this inward orientation and the defensiveness. We think seemingly crazy things would look perfectly rational, and luckily that phase is behind us. It's also a fact in the 70s that the IBM was forced to leave India. India was one of the bigger operations for IBM in the 60s and the 70s. But the political mood and the political context in India in the 70s made it very, very hard for IBM to operate in India in the 1970s. So I think there is always the danger that even as we become stronger, even as we become bigger, even as we become more powerful, the sentiments of inward orientation, the sentiments of defensiveness, the sentiments of helplessness often can push us into doing things which are not really smart. So therefore, I think as we look ahead, what we have is that the last 20 years have produced an extraordinary positive evolution of India's relationship with the US and the West. And besides commerce, besides defense, it's really the technology part that is the biggest new element that is out there, that is likely to become a great vehicle, because the technological part of it is not just about a technological box that you bring in. Today, it's about economy, the digital question, whether it is innovation in relation to health, on the public health related issues, whether it is space and communications. Every one of these today is tied to technology. And one part is about innovating, creating new technologies. But where the IIMs come, is really to think about its social consequences as well, to be able to design the best possible policies for a developing country like India to take full advantage of technological change, to be able to design systems that would meet our requirements and India's particular social needs, rather than merely imitating or just simply taking the technology as a black box and trying to use it for our conditions. So I think that's where I would say the all of you, those who come through IITs and IIMs, will have a huge role in shaping the India's adaptation to the new technologies, and to be able to leverage that to transform India, to make India more prosperous and more peaceful within itself and with the world. So my sense is that today, as we look ahead, it is necessary to think of the role that you play in this world as technological innovation begins to transform many sectors of life. And Dr. Shetty pointed out some of them to you. My sense is we need to be able to fully, be conscious of this new technological revolution that's unfolding and of the possibilities that it brings for us, and the need to be able to manage that effectively. So my concluding thought at this point is really to say that as the relationship between India and the West grows by leaps and bounds, technology is going to be the central part of it. And unlike our generation, which was growing up, the West was about the lack of opportunities in India, that people went to the West because of the lack of opportunities in India. But the current generation, all of you, have this extraordinary, unprecedented opportunity to become a two-way bridge between India and the West. So this is not just about brain drain or brain gain, whichever way you want to put it, but it's really about becoming a two-way bridge, that Indians run, top companies in the United States, whether it is Google or something else, or NASA, and how we can use this two-way bridge to transform India for the benefit of Indian people. And this bridge, building this bridge, will be extraordinarily satisfying intellectually. It is also professionally appealing, because the kind of things that you get to do by being part of that bridge between India and the West is going to be exciting professionally. But I'm sure, as all of you know, it's also financially rewarding. But I think it is the first two that are going to give it a meaning in terms of what you can do today to be able to transform to leverage this transformation that is unfolding. I'm sure many of you will be on this bridge in the days ahead and will play a leading role in strengthening this two-way partnership between India and the West, in which India would eventually become the top three states in the world in technological innovation and in applying or in leveraging Indian the mass market and the population and the complexity that it presents offers opportunities of its own, of thinking in new ways to leverage the technological transformation that takes place. So I will stop here, and I wish you all the best as you step out into this world. I wish I was 30 years younger, where you can see the kind of possibilities that exist in the world today, and wish you all the very best in the days ahead.